You're really trying to eat BBQ. For the disabled porridge fits better. Tracy's shrill laughter rang out, dragging the whole crowd into mockery. Jake suddenly yanked the chair away, causing Emily to sprawl on the ground, while a phone camera swung to capture the entire humiliation. She struggled to stand, biting her lip in silence, with no one reaching out a hand to help. But just when it seemed she was nothing more than a helpless joke, the screech of bike tires cut through the air. A whole group of bikers appeared and stopped. The leader placed a firm hand on Emily's shoulder, his deep voice steady. "Hello, little girl. It's been a long time." Emily's hands gripped her crutches, her knuckles pale against the worn metal. The fall had scraped her knee, and a small streak of blood showed through her plain cotton pants. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't meet Tracy's sneer or Jake's smug grin. Her eyes stayed on the ground, her dark hair falling over her face like a curtain. The air was thick with the smell of charred burgers and cheap beer, and the late summer heat pressed down on the backyard. The barbecue was supposed to be a neighborhood thing, kids running around, music playing, plastic cups everywhere. But now it felt like a stage, and Emily was the unwilling star. She pushed herself up slow and steady, her crutches creaking under her weight. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Just whispers, snickers, and that phone still recording. Hey, real quick, grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment about what this moment makes you feel, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like Emily's need to be heard, and we're telling them for people like you who know what it's like to keep going when the world's against you. All right, back to what happened. Jake, all swagger in his designer sneakers and too-tight shirt, stepped closer, his shadow falling over Emily. He was the kind of guy who'd been the king of high school, captain of the basketball team, still riding that glory at 25. "What's the deal, Emily? You think you're one of us?" he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the yard. A few people chuckled, their faces half hidden behind red cups. Tracy perched on a picnic table, tossed her bleached hair, and smirked. She was Jake's girlfriend, always ready with a barb, her nails painted bright pink to match her fake smile. "Look at her pants," Tracy called out. "Did you borrow those from your grandma's laundry basket?" The crowd laughed louder now, bolder, like they'd all been waiting for permission. A woman in a floral blouse, the kind who always posted about her perfect family on social media, leaned toward her husband, her voice low, but not low enough. She shouldn't be here dragging everyone's mood down. Her husband nodded, sipping his drink, his eyes flicking to Emily like she was a stain on the party. Emily's fingers twitched on her crutches and she shifted her weight, the metal clinking softly. She didn't respond, didn't even look their way. Instead, she reached into her pocket, pulling out a small faded keychain, a tiny silver bike with a snake logo. Her thumb brushed over it, her lips pressing tight like it was the only thing keeping her anchored. The crowd didn't notice, too busy laughing, but the cyclist leader's eyes caught the motion and his jaw tightened just for a second. Emily's shoulders stiffened as another voice cut through the chatter. A guy in a flashy watch, the kind who always name-dropped his connections, pointed at her crutches. "Those things look like they're from the Stone Age," he said, grinning like he'd just told a great joke. "You ever think about upgrading, sweetheart? Or is that too much for you?" The crowd snickered and Tracy clapped her hands, delighted. Emily's head tilted slightly, her eyes meeting his. "They get me where I need to go," she said, her voice steady, almost too quiet. The guy blinked, his grin faltering, but he recovered fast, turning to the crowd for approval. "Yeah, to the back of the line, right?" The laughter swelled again, but Emily just adjusted her grip, her fingers steady, her gaze unyielding. The cyclists stood silently, their bikes lined up like sentinels. One of them, a wiry guy with a scar across his cheek, knelt to check his tire, his fingers brushing over a small nick in the rubber. He glanced at the leader, a quick nod passing between them. They'd seen Jake's kick, noticed the way the crowd egged him on. Emily's eyes flicked to the scarred cyclist, and for a moment, her hand paused on her keychain, her thumb tracing the snake's wings. She didn't say anything, but her shoulders straightened like she was drawing strength from something no one else could see. The crowd's laughter started to feel forced, like they were trying to drown out the tension building in the air. Jake wasn't one to let silence linger. He stepped forward, his chest puffed out. "What's this, some kind of rescue mission for the crippled princess?" His voice was all bravado, but his eyes darted to the cyclists, sizing them up. Tracy hopped off the picnic table, her heels sinking into the grass. "Don't tell me you're gonna race with her," she said, her laugh sharp as glass. "What's she gonna do? Hobble a lap?" The buzzcut guy snorted. Bet she had tripped before she made it 10 feet. Then another voice from the back of the crowd. some guy in a polo shirt who always talked too loud at these things. Race her. If she wins a lap around the park, I'll bow and call her sister. The crowd roared, phones coming out ready to turn this into another viral moment. A teenage girl, maybe 16, stood at the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed tight. She'd been quiet all night. Her sneakers scuffed her hoodie too big for her frame. She watched Emily, her eyes narrowing, as Tracy's laughter echoed. When Jake raised his voice, the girl's hands clenched into fists, and she muttered something under her breath, too soft for anyone to hear. Emily caught her eye just for a second, and the girl froze like she'd been caught. Emily gave her a small nod, barely noticeable, but it was enough. The girl's shoulders relaxed, and she slipped her phone out, starting to type, her fingers flying across the screen. The crowd didn't see it, but something was shifting like a current moving under the surface. Emily's shoulders shook just for a second. She looked down at the grass, her crutches digging into the dirt. "I can't," she said so soft it was almost a whisper. The words weren't for them, they were for herself. The cyclists didn't flinch. The leader, still standing close, tilted his head, his eyes never leaving her. Another cyclist, a woman with short hair and scars on her knuckles, stepped forward. "She doesn't need to race," she said, her voice calm but firm, like she was stating a fact. "We'll do it for her." The crowd murmured, confused. Jake laughed loud and fake. "You're joking, right? You think you can outrun us? We were basketball champs back in the day. You guys just pedal around in circles." The leader smiled, just a small curve of his lips. "Here's the deal," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We race, one lap around the park. If we win, you apologize to Emily. In front of the whole town." The crowd buzzed, phones already raised, live streams starting. Tracy rolled her eyes. "This is stupid. You're gonna lose and look like idiots." But the energy in the yard was shifting. People were leaning forward, whispering to each other, their drinks forgotten. Emily's hands tightened on her crutches, her lips moving like she was saying something under her breath. She looked at the leader, then at the logo on his jersey again, and her eyes lingered like she was seeing something no one else could. A man in a tailored blazer, the kind who always showed up to these things to network, nudged his buddy, smirking. "Bet she's got some sob story they're eating up," he said, loud enough for Emily to hear. Probably paid those bikers to show up for pity points. His buddy, a guy with a gold chain and a fake tan, laughed. "Yeah, what's next? A GoFundMe for new crutches." Emily's hand paused on her keychain, her fingers curling tight around the silver bike. She didn't look at them, but her posture shifted her back straighter, her chin lifting just enough to catch the light. The cyclist leader's eyes flicked to the blazer guy, and he stepped closer to Emily, his presence like a shield. The crowd's laughter died down just for a moment, as if they sensed something they couldn't name. Years ago, Emily's dad used to sit her on his lap, showing her old photos from his cycling days. He'd point to that same logo, a snake with wings, and tell her stories about his team, about the races they won, the mountains they climbed. He'd laugh, his voice warm, and say, "We were unstoppable, Em. You'll be unstoppable too." She was just a kid then, before the accident that took her legs strength before her dad was gone. Now standing in this backyard, that logo felt like a ghost pulling her back to a time when she felt safe. She blinked hard, her fingers brushing the edge of her crutch again, like she could still feel her dad's hand on hers. Jake wasn't done. He swaggered over to the cyclists' bikes, pretending to admire them. "Nice toys," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hope they don't break when we smoke you." He kicked at one of the tires, not hard, but enough to make the bike wobble. The cyclists didn't react, but their eyes followed him, sharp and steady. Tracy, meanwhile, slipped away from the crowd, a soda can in her hand. She wandered near the makeshift track at the edge of the park where the race would happen. Nobody noticed when she tipped the can, letting sticky liquid pool on the path. She smirked, tossing the can into a bush, and sauntered back to Jake's side. The crowd was too busy placing bets, laughing, calling out taunts. "Don't waste your time," one guy yelled, his voice slurred from too many beers. "You're just defending trash." Emily heard it. Her hands shook, the crutches wobbling under her. She looked at the ground, her breath coming faster like she was fighting to hold herself together. For a moment, it looked like she might walk away, just leave the whole mess behind. Her foot dragged in the grass, and she stopped, her shoulders slumping. Jake raised his beer can, grinning at the crowd. "Here's to the farewell show for losers." He shouted, and the crowd cheered, their voices drowning out the music. Emily's head stayed down, her hair hiding her face. The phone guy zoomed in again, his lens catching the tremble in her hands, the way her crutches dug into the dirt. A woman in a tight dress, her lipstick too bright for the casual barbecue, sidled up to Tracy, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Poor thing, she must be so embarrassed, she said loud enough for Emily to catch every word. I mean, showing up like that, thinking she fits in. Tracy smirked, twirling a strand of hair. She's delusional. Probably thinks those bikers are her knights in shining spandex. The crowd tittered, and the woman's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, like she'd just won a point in some invisible game. Emily's fingers stilled on her crutches, and she lifted her head, her gaze locking on the woman for a heartbeat. "I'm here because I was invited," she said, her voice low but clear, cutting through the noise. The woman's smile froze, and she turned away, pretending to adjust her dress, but the crowd's laughter faltered just for a moment. The race started with a shout. Jake and his crew, buzzcut guy, polo shirt, loudmouth, and a couple others lined up against the cyclists. The park's path was narrow, winding through trees and past picnic tables. The crowd pressed in, phones out, live streams rolling. The cyclists moved like a unit, their bikes humming as they took off. Jake's team sprinted hard, their sneakers pounding the dirt, confident they'd leave the old peddlers behind. But something was off. One of the bikes hit the soda slick spot, skidding hard. The rider, a lean guy with tattoos curling up his arm, didn't fall. He caught himself, muscles flexing, and pushed forward like it was nothing. The crowd gasped, then cheered, not sure who they were rooting for anymore. Halfway through the race, a kid no older than 12 with a baseball cap turned backward, broke away from the crowd, running alongside the cyclists. He was shouting, his voice high and excited, waving a crumpled piece of paper. "Go Emily's team," he yelled, his sneakers kicking up dirt. The cyclists didn't break focus, but the scarred guy gave him a quick grin like he appreciated the kid's guts. Emily's eyes followed the boy, her lips parting slightly like she hadn't expected anyone to cheer for her. The kid's mom, a frazzled woman with a baby on her hip, grabbed his arm, scolding him to stay back. But the boy kept waving that paper, and Emily's hand tightened on her keychain, her breath steadying like his voice had reached her in a way nothing else had. Jake's face was red, his breath coming in gasps. He wasn't built for this. Anymore, too many beers, too many years since high school. The cyclists, though, didn't falter. They moved like they'd done this 1,000 times, their bikes cutting through the air with precision. The tattooed guy pulled ahead, his eyes locked on the path. Another cyclist, a woman with a braid down her back, matched his pace, her legs pumping like pistons. Jake's crew started to lag, their steps uneven, their confidence cracking. The livestream chat blew up. A Justice for Emily was everywhere, comments pouring in from strangers who'd caught the feed. Emily stood at the edge of the crowd, her crutches planted firm, her eyes fixed on the cyclists. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. The race ended faster than anyone expected. The cyclists crossed the finish line, their bikes gliding to a stop. Jake's team stumbled and panting, sweat-soaked and furious. Jake threw his water bottle into the grass, his face twisted. "Not fair," he yelled, pointing at the cyclists. "You're professionals or something?" Tracy crossed her arms, her voice sharp. "It's just a stupid game, don't take it seriously." The crowd wasn't buying it. Someone in the back, a guy with a trucker hat, laughed out loud. "Y'all got smoked and you're still whining." The phone guy turned his camera on Jake now, catching his red-faced rant. Emily didn't move, didn't speak. She just watched her hands steady on her crutches. As the crowd's jeers grew louder, a man in a faded denim jacket standing quietly at the back stepped forward. He was older, his face lined with years of hard work, and he carried a small notebook, its pages worn and dog-eared. He didn't look at Jake or Tracy, just walked straight to Emily and handed her the notebook. "Your dad gave this to me," he said, his voice rough but kind. "Said to give it to you when you needed it most." Emily's fingers hesitated, then took the book, her eyes scanning the cover, a faint sketch of that same snake logo. She opened it, her hands trembling, revealing pages of her dad's handwriting, notes about courage, about never giving up. The crowd didn't notice, but the cyclists did, and their leader gave the man a nod like they'd planned this all along. Jake's anger boiled over. He stormed toward Emily, his hand raised like he was going to slap her. The crowd froze, a collective intake of breath. Some people looked away, others leaned forward, phones still recording. Emily didn't flinch. She looked up at him, her eyes calm but unyielding. Before Jake could get closer, the cyclist leader stepped in front of her, his body a wall. He didn't say a word, just stared Jake down, his eyes hard as steel. Jake stopped, his hand dropping, his bravado crumbling. The leader reached into his pocket, pulled out a worn police badge, and held it up. The crowd went silent. Another cyclist, the woman with the scars, held up her phone. "It's all recorded," she said, her voice flat. "Every word, every move." A woman in the crowd, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, clutched her purse and whispered to her friend, her voice shaking with nerves. "Did you see that badge? Who are these people?" Her friend, a guy with a goatee and a beer in hand, shrugged, but his eyes were wide, like he was rethinking everything. Emily's hand rested on the notebook, her fingers tracing her dad's words without opening it again. She didn't need to read it to feel its weight. The cyclists formed a loose circle around her, not crowding her, just there, their presence steady. The woman with the bun stepped back, her purse slipping to the ground, and nobody picked it up. The air felt heavier now, like the crowd was starting to see something they'd missed. Sirens cut through the air. A police car rolled into the park, lights flashing. The officer who stepped out wasn't just any cop. He was, one of them, another cyclist, his jersey still visible under his open jacket. He walked straight to Jake, his face all business. "You're coming with us," he said, pulling out handcuffs. Jake's mouth opened, then closed his eyes, darting to Tracy, to the crowd, to the phones. Tracy tried to back away, but another officer grabbed her arm. "You two," he said. The crowd parted as they were led away, Jake's head down. Tracy muttering curses under her breath. The live stream was still going, the comments flooding with shock, anger, and cheers. As the police car pulled away, a young woman in a waitress uniform, her apron stained from a long shift, pushed through the crowd. She'd been watching from the sidelines, her hands twisting a napkin into knots. She stopped in front of Emily, hesitating, then held out a small daisy she'd picked from the park's edge. I know what it's like," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "to feel like you don't belong." Emily looked at the flower, then at the woman, and her fingers closed around the daisy, careful not to crush it. The waitress stepped back, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and the crowd watched, some of them shifting uncomfortably, like they were seeing themselves in a mirror for the first time. Emily stood there, her crutches steady now. The crowd was quieter, some people slipping away, embarrassed. Others stayed, their faces soft with something like guilt. Jake's voice carried as he was shoved into the police car. "Nobody cares about you, Emily," he shouted, desperate. Tracy, already cuffed, hissed. "Tomorrow everyone will forget you. You're still just a cripple." A few of the barbecue guests nodded, their faces smug, like they agreed. Emily's knees buckled and she sank to the ground, her crutches clattering. For a moment, it looked like they had won, like their words had finally broken her. Her hands covered her face, her shoulders shaking. The woman cyclist, the one with the braid, knelt beside her. She took off her helmet, revealing a face weathered by years of grit and triumph. "Hey," she said softly, her hand gentle on Emily's arm. "You're not alone. I'm Sarah. I've been where you are." She held out her hand, and Emily took it, her fingers trembling. Sarah pulled her up, steadying her. "We're gonna train together, you and me. You're stronger than they'll ever know." Emily's eyes widened, her breath catching. The crowd was watching, some with tears in their eyes. Phones were still out, but now they were capturing something else, something real. A man in a wheelchair, his hands calloused from years of navigating a world not built for him, rolled up to the edge of the crowd. He'd been quiet all night, parked near the picnic tables, his eyes tracking every move. Now he leaned forward, his voice rough but clear. "You did good, kid," he said to Emily, his hands resting on his wheels. "You stood there, and that's more than most." Emily's eyes met his, and she nodded, her lips trembling into a small smile. The man gave her a salute, sharp and proud, then rolled back into the shadows. The cyclists watched him go, their faces unreadable, but their shoulders squared like they were honoring a silent promise. The next morning, the internet was on fire. Emily's face was everywhere, her story spreading like wildfire. Justice for Emily trended for days, clips of the race, the arrest, the cyclist's quiet strength. News vans showed up at the park, reporters talking about the local girl who stood up to bullies. Jake lost his job at the car dealership. His boss didn't want the bad press. Tracy's modeling gig dried up when her agency saw the videos. The loudmouth in the polo shirt. His golf buddies stopped inviting him to games, their texts going unanswered. The consequences weren't loud or dramatic. They were just there, steady, like gravity pulling things back into place. A few days later, a local reporter, a woman with a notepad and a tired smile, approached Emily at the park. She'd been there the night of the barbecue, blending into the crowd, taking notes. Now she held out a small recorder, her voice gentle. "People need to hear your story, Emily," she said. "Not just the race, but who you are." Emily hesitated, her fingers brushing the daisy tucked into her pocket, now wilted but still there. She nodded slow and careful and started talking, not about the pain, but about her dad, about the keychain, about the cyclists who showed up when no one else did. The reporter's eyes softened, and she scribbled faster like she was capturing something bigger than a story. The mayor called a week later. He stood at a podium, Emily beside him, her crutches gleaming under the lights. He announced a community fund in her name money to fight bullying to help kids like her find their voice. The crowd cheered and Emily smiled, small but real. Sarah stood behind her along with the other cyclists, their jerseys bright in the sunlight. They didn't say much, didn't need to. Their presence said it all. Emily's eyes shone not with tears now, but with something new, pride maybe, or the start of it. She wasn't invisible anymore. At the edge of the podium, the teenage girl from the barbecue stood with her mom, her hoodie still too big, her phone in her hand. She'd been the one to post the first Justice for Emily hashtag, her fingers shaking as she typed that night. Now she held up a sign hand-drawn with marker, "Emily, you're my hero." Emily saw it and her breath caught her hand tightening on her crutch. She didn't wave or call out, just gave the girl a look, steady and warm like a promise. The girl grinned, her eyes bright, and snapped a photo, already posting it to the world. Life didn't erase the scars. Emily still walked with crutches, still felt the weight of those words sometimes. But she carried herself differently now, her steps a little surer, her head a little higher. The cyclists kept in touch, sending her messages inviting her to their rides. Sarah started training her, teaching her how to build strength, how to push through pain. The world saw her now, not as a victim, but as someone who'd stood her ground, who'd let her silence speak louder than their noise. And that was enough. For everyone who's ever been pushed down, who's heard those cruel words, who's felt like they don't belong. This one's for you. You're not invisible. You're not forgotten. Your strength is real, and it's waiting for its moment. Just keep standing, keep walking, keep being you. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.